Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa natubu ilayh wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina man yahdillahu fahuwa al-muhtad wa man yudlil falan tajida lahu waliyan murshida wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wahdahu la sharika lah وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد. I begin my khutbah today in the praise of our Creator, in the praise of the one who has blessed each and every one of us with life. And not only has He blessed us with life, but He sustains life for us. He is the one who inspires faith in our hearts. He is the one who showers His blessings upon us day in and day out. He is the one who, after showering His blessings upon us day in and day out, He is the one who will hold us to account for those blessings. He is the one who will cause each and every one of us to die one day and to leave this temporary home of ours. He will bring us back to life and hold us to account for deeds. We begin in His praise, and His praise alone, the King of all kings and the Master of the Day of Judgment, Allahu Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And then we send the best of prayers, the best of supplications, and the best of blessings on the best of creation, on the best of examples, on the best of role models, the one who should be followed, the one who erased the disobedience of Allah Ta'ala from this earth, the Prophet of mercy, An-Nabiyyu sallallahu alayhi wasallam. We send the best of blessings, prayers, and supplications upon him. And I remind you all, my brothers and sisters in the faith, that do not die, do not leave this world, this temporary home, except in a state of taqwa, a state of submission, love, and fear of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. After having said that, my brothers and sisters, in this timely, short khutbah with you all, I wanted to reflect upon the concept of, thankfulness. We're in that time. And that time is a time where American society in general, they talk about this issue of thankfulness. They say it's the season to show gratitude, the season to show thankfulness. But my question to you all, and I was reflecting upon this, and I was reflecting upon the state of our community in America, is that what happens in your life or in our lives when sometimes we feel like our life isn't going in a direction or isn't heading in a way where we feel like we really should be thankful? In other words, what happens that if you experience some challenges in your life, some calamities, some difficulties, some hardships? It could be the loss of a family member. It could be the loss of a job. It could be sickness. It could be whatever struggles we experience in our life, right? And we feel that, I'm really not up for being grateful. I mean, I look at the guy next to me, I look at the guy down the street, the other family, they have it all. They have something, they have that, but these are things that I don't have in my life. These are things that maybe internally you're suffering, right? So my question to you, maybe putting it a different way, is that can you or should you even be thankful or be in a state of gratitude when you're actually literally in a state of suffering or depression or deprivation? If things you don't have, is it still possible, or is this only for a certain type of person? I ask this question to you all because I know the reality of living in this world. And although, this society we live in calls us, they say, be thankful. Be grateful, right? The reality is so many people in this society and even so many Muslims are suffering. And it could be materially or it could be even emotionally or internally, right? So it's something for us to think about. And if we can contemplate this issue, this question, we can expand on that question and we can look at our brothers and sisters overseas. Take the example of the brothers and sisters overseas. Our brothers and sisters in Palestine, right? Just take their example that they have been living for decades, as we know, in what's called the open air prison. There's a blockade through sea, a blockade through air, a blockade through land. So they're literally in a prison. It's like if you had one of these prisons in Jessup or any of these other prisons and the guards, they said, you know what, we're gonna leave the prison. We're gonna give you guys freedom. But what did they do? The guards, they actually went outside the prison and waited for you to come out before they what? Ruthlessly attacked you. That's not freedom. They said they gave you freedom, but they gave you freedom in that prison, right? They have no rights. They have no freedom to move and go, to visit families. They've been locked down for decades. And then we saw in the past 14 months, we saw the worst genocide that history has ever witnessed, right? So ruthless, so barbaric, right? The destruction of the masajid, of homes, of families being torn apart, of children losing their lives, right? So I ask you, although it may be difficult for us, right? In this season that we're in America, the challenges and the sufferings that we're going through, what about our Palestinian brothers and sisters? What advice could we give them that are going through this type of ordeal? Should they be also people that should just give up and say that, no, we acknowledge the suffering. Why is God doing to this us? Why is God doing this to us? Or should they try to overcome that? So I wanted to share you the advice that our ulama give. They say, first and foremost, that every suffering that you experience, every calamity, every challenge you go through, right? Basically, you have one of three responses. One of three responses. The first response, you can be somebody who goes into what's called like the panic attack. That something happens in your life and you feel, you know, I just can't cope with this. I just cannot cope with this. It's the panic attack. You become angry, you become upset, you become depressed, you become emotionally unstable, right? I cannot cope with this, this is too much for me. This is the panic attack. This is something that our ulama say is unbecoming of a Muslim. A Muslim should not fall into this first reaction. The second one they say is the one who he has this tremendous calamity in this life, suffering that he's going through, but he's patient. It's bitter to him. It's extremely difficult for him to endure, but he's patient. And what we mean by patient is he does not say or do something that would be displeasing to Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. This, they say, is the middle level. This is the bare minimum that Allah Ta'ala and His Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam are calling the believer to, because this dunya is filled with suffering and filled with challenges. But the minimum the believer should have is he should be able to control his tongue and his body and not do something that would be displeasing to Allah Ta'ala. But you know, our ulama, they mentioned a third group of people. And this is what each and every one of us, right, we should literally strive for when we experience a calamity, a difficulty, suffering in our life. They say that that person, his reaction is that he is a person who actually looks at the calamity in his life and recognizes that that calamity could in fact, in some way, shape or form, be a blessing. That calamity in your life, in the life of the Palestinian brothers or sisters, or all of the other Muslims or community that's suffering anywhere in the world, that calamity, that hardship, that difficulty could in fact be a blessing in disguise. And because he recognizes that, he recognizes that nothing happens in this world except by the decree and hikmatun baligha, the great wisdom of Allah Ta'ala, that could be a blessing. So he is in a state of what? He is actually in a state of thankfulness, they say. This is the highest level, even above the one who is patient, right? So the three, one was the panic attack, two was the guy who's patient, and third is the one who goes above and beyond these two, and he's actually even He can be thankful for a calamity because he recognizes that that calamity could have some khair in it, some benefit or blessing in it. Now what is the dalil for this? Where did they get this from, the great scholars of the past? They mentioned the famous ayah in Surah Shura where Allah Ta'ala, He says, وَلَوْ بَسَطَ اللَّهُ رِزْقَ لِعِبَادِهِ لَبَغَوْا فِي الْأَرْضِ. A beautiful ayah. Allah Ta'ala, He mentions in the Holy Quran, He said that if Allah Ta'ala, وَلَوْ بَسَطَ اللَّهُ رِزْقَ لِعِبَادِهِ, if Allah Ta'ala was to expand, was to grow, was to give you rizq, and when He means rizq here, He doesn't mean just wealth. If He was to give you health, if He was to give you family, if He was to give you money, whatever it may be, Allah says that there are a certain group of people that they would take that blessing and they would end up what? Misusing that blessing to the point of oppressing others, wronging others. They would use wealth, what? To oppress or wrong others. They would use health or health to end up misusing that health, again, to oppress or wrong others. Same thing with any blessing. One of the great companions of the Prophet ﷺ, Khutbah radiallahu ta'ala an, he literally said this. The Mufassirin described he lived in a time when who? There was a certain community. He says, and I'll tell you, he says, the Bani Qaynuqa, the Bani An-Nadir, right? He says, and the Bani Qurayza, these were some of the Jewish tribes. He said, we used to look at them and we used to see that the wealth that they had, the blessings and power that God had given them in this world, and there was a sense of envy that we had. That how come we don't have that wealth? How come we don't have that power? How come we don't have those same blessings? He said, but when I heard and I remembered Allah Ta'ala say this ayah in Surah Shura, I began to say, Ya Allah, you are Allah. He is capable of anything and everything, and in His great wisdom, He put me in this position and place that I'm in. I don't need that money. I don't need that power. I don't need that. Why? Because there's something more important than that. Khabbab radiallahu ta'ala, he realized what? That the calamity that he had in his life, which was somebody who was deprived of financial provisions. He was not somebody wealthy. He didn't have the money that other people had. But he realized that if I had it, I could become a wrongdoer, oppressor, somebody who's disobedient to Allah Ta'ala. So there's something more valuable than having these worldly things, and that is what? That is obedience to Allah Ta'ala. That is love of Allah Ta'ala, right? So this is something each and every one of us should recognize, that Allah Ta'ala, He made this dunya a place of trials, a place of tribulation, a place of sacrifice, but He wants to see how will you behave, how will you react. So I want to remind all of the brothers and sisters that are here today, especially our younger generation, right? Don't make the litmus test of success or failure, right? Gains and worldly things in this life, whether it's education, whether it's family, whether it's money. Sure, strive in those things. I'm not saying don't strive in those things, but don't gauge your success or failure in this life on those things. The true success or failure, right, is you being a servant to Allah Ta'ala, you being a lover of Allah, you having fear of Allah Ta'ala, and you leaving this world in that state. This is the key. Now, after having said that, I want to remind you all of a very famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. This is a hadith that comes in the Jami' of Imam At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah on the authority of Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhuma. And this is part of this is a dua that many of us, we hear, especially in the month of Ramadan, we hear it. Some of us, we may hear it throughout the time of year, but I wonder how many of us actually reflect upon the meaning of this dua and the meaning of this hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You see, Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, he said that قَلَّمَا كَانَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ يَقُومُ مِنْ مَجْلِسٍ. He says that it was very rarely. In other words, the habit of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was to do something. He says, قَلَّمَا. He says, very rarely did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam get up from a gathering. Right? حَتَّى يَدْعُوَ بِهَؤُلَاءِ دَعْوَةً. Until the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would actually make a prayer. And there was a certain prayer that he would consistently make when he would get up from gatherings. Now, notice that Abdullah ibn Umar, the narrator, he's the great companion, the son of Umar ibn Khattab, he says that number one, the Prophet ﷺ would do it regularly. Two, he would do it intentionally in the presence of others, in gatherings, to remind others, right? That, hey, put your GPS in the right direction. Be heading in the right direction. Make sure your mindset is like this. So what are these da'wat? What are the du'as that the Prophet ﷺ would specifically make to teach the ummah? Right? So Abdullah ibn Umar, he mentions one of them. He says the Prophet ﷺ would say, وَلَا تَجْعَلْ مُصِيبَتَنَا فِي دِينِنَا. He would say, oh Allah, do not make the calamities that any of us as a ummah or community that we go through, do not make those calamities of faith, calamities of belief, calamities of love in you. Meaning, don't put us in the calamity where a Muslim, he reaches a point and he questions, well, does Allah love me? He questions, do I have obedience to Allah? He questions the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, oh Allah, la taj'al musibatana fi dinina. Oh Allah, I ask you that do not make musibah in our deen. He did not say, don't make musibah in our dunya. He did not say, don't make musibah in our dunya. The Prophet ﷺ consistently, his dua was, do not make musibah in our deen. How many of us, when we make dua to Allah Ta'ala, sure we ask for things of the dunya, but we're asking Allah Ta'ala to protect our deen, to protect our religious commitment, to protect our love of Allah Ta'ala and the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And then in the same dua, and this the same dua again, we hear many of our ai reciting this dua in Ramadan, but it's something the Prophet ﷺ, he would do in gatherings, getting up consistently. He would also say, وَلَا تَجْعَلْ أَكْبَرَ هَمِّنَا. He would say, وَلَا تَجْعَلْ الدُّنْيَا أَكْبَرَ هَمِّنَا. He would say that do not make the dunya our main goal. This is what we're striving for. Right? No, we're actually striving for the akhirah, whether we get the dunya or we don't get it. Right? That is by the decree of Allah Ta'ala. But what are we striving for? What is our goal? Our goal is the pleasure of Allah Ta'ala, and we're striving for akhirah. If Allah Ta'ala gives you dunya, great. If He doesn't give you dunya, great as well. Alhamdulillah ala kulli hal. This is the attitude of the believer, and this is how, brothers and sisters, we can attain a state of gratitude even when we are in a state of deprivation. Right? We can, regardless of the circumstances, we go above and beyond that, and we become a community that strives in the path of Allah Ta'ala, regardless of the suffering that we're experiencing and going through. The last thing that I wanted to say just before I close, one other ayah from the Holy Quran, and I want you to remember this ayah, because this is also an ayah that describes that the realities of people can be very different when they have that love of Allah and love of the Prophet ﷺ in their heart and mind. It as if their experiences are completely different. It is as if they are seeing something different. It is as if their heart and their mind is a different place. Who? The one who has his GPS straight, the one who has love of Allah and His Messenger ﷺ in their mind and their heart, right? They're not going to be affected by these dunya quote-unquote losses, right? Because although they could actually be blessings. And the other group is those who their main focus is the dunya. They will really suffer in this world when there are calamities that happen to them. There is one ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah I was thinking about, and this ayah specifically has to do with the king of the past. I won't go into the details of the story, but there was a mighty king of the past, and this king, he raised an army. After raising an army, they went to confront an enemy, okay, a great tyrant of the past. Now, when they went to confront that tyrant, within the army of this king, they were basically, the Quran describes them as two groups of people. One group of people, they specifically said, La taqatana al-yawm. They said, and some of the Mufassirin, they described that when they saw this massive army that was opposing them, they saw a well-equipped army, they saw huge numbers, they saw they had all of these dunya, material successes. There was a group of the believers, a group that was with this king, and they said, La taqatana al-yawm. They said that there is no way we will ever win against this group. We might as well quit today. We lost. Just give up. Give up. But see, Allah Ta'ala, He wants you to learn a lesson from this experience that happened thousands and thousands of years ago. He says, وَقَالَ الَّذِينَ. He says that there is a group of them from that same army, that they يَظُنُّونَ أَنَّهُمْ مُلَاقُ اللَّهِ, that they knew that they were going to meet Allah one day. In other words, they were a people that they were living in the dunya, but they were working for the akhirah. They were living in the dunya, but they were working for the akhirah. They had so much love and fear of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. They did not see what those other people saw. They did not see what those other people saw. They saw something completely different, although they're both looking at the exact same massive army. You know what the second group said? They said, Kam min fi'ah. Kam min fi'ah. That how many of a small group, ghalabat fi'ah. That how many of a small group actually overcome a much larger group. Right? Bi'idnillah. By the power and will of Allah Ta'ala alone. How many smaller groups overcame a larger group? How many least equipped, ill-equipped groups overcame a much more massive, well-equipped group? This was the aqidah, the belief, right, of who? Those who were living in this dunya but working for the akhirah. Those who loved Allah Ta'ala. Why am I sharing that with you all, brothers and sisters? Is because this ayah reminds us of the importance, right, of understanding that calamities can be a blessing. Nothing in this world, it happens except by the will and the hikmah of Allah Ta'ala, right? You are not here to judge Allah and His qada and qadar. You are not here to do that. You are here to show your obedience and your allegiance and your love regardless of His decree. Regardless of His decree. And so from this lesson we learn, for our beloved brothers and sisters, whether they live in this world and they're suffering internally, the great hardships and the difficulties that all of us are going through in America, or many of us are going through, or whether it is our beloved brothers in Palestine and throughout the world, right? We learn that love of Allah Ta'ala is non-negotiable. We're willing to give up the dunya, but we will never give up the akhirah. We ask Allah Ta'ala to accept and guide us all. Subhanakam shadu wa la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. My brothers and sisters, I begin with my khutbah today by sharing with you the thought of thankfulness in the season that we're in. I reminded you that our scholars have reminded us, right, that a person can be in a state of panic, a state of patience, or a state of thankfulness. And regardless of whether he's suffering a loss of wealth, health, family, whatever it may be, the ideal state of a believer, right, is he should be in a state of thankfulness. He is thankful for what? He's thankful that God has preserved His deen for him, right? He's not necessarily thankful for a specific calamity that happens, although he recognizes in calamity there could be blessings. But what he's thankful for is that God has allowed me, regardless of the challenges that I face, and the exact same with our Palestinian brothers and sisters, He has allowed me to adhere to my faith. I have often wondered when I see the images of our Palestinian brothers and sisters and the genocide that they have suffered, right? I find it sometimes very difficult to understand that how can they keep going? How can they go today, which is Friday, to Saturday, when half of their family has been wiped out? How can they go from one day to the next when they have no home, when they have no food, when it seems like the world is against them, when they seem like there's media that's spreading lies and misinformation about them? I often wonder that. And the answer, right, comes from the advice of the Prophet ﷺ and what Allah Ta'ala describes. And that is that even in a state of deprivation, a person should be thankful for his connection and his commitment to Allah Ta'ala. Because a person who has deen, right, in the end he will be forever successful. The person who has deen, the person who has love of Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the end he will always be successful. And the opposite is also true. No matter what dunya successes you have, if you don't have the love of Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in your life and in your heart, in the end you'll always be a loser. You'll always be a loser. You see, this is the difference, right,
between the believer and the non-believer. And I also shared with you the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he used to consistently make the dua that, oh Allah, la taj'al musibatana fi dinina. Oh Allah, don't make musibah in our deen. Right? And he made this dua because the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us that we should all be those people who are striving for the akhirah. I end my khutbah with reminding us that we ask that Allah Ta'ala, no doubt, even if there is a calamity and there's blessings in it, that He alleviate the suffering of all of the brothers and sisters, not only in America, but again our beloved brothers and sisters overseas. We ask Allah Ta'ala that He make this a means to unite the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We ask Allah Ta'ala that He make this a means to elevate the ranks in the akhirah. We ask Allah Ta'ala, may He make this a means that we all become lovers. We become lovers of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and Allah Ta'ala, and this propels us, this instigates us to walk in his path, the path of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. وصلى الله على النبي الكريم وأقم الصلاة.